In our first session, we looked at the 14 encyclical letters of Pope St. John Paul II the Great. We put them in their historical order, and we saw how they are related one to another. We saw that unique among the encyclicals of John Paul II is that he begins with 3 encyclical letters on each of the persons of the Divine and Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We also saw that in the middle of this triptych, this Trinitarian triptych, he places 2 encyclical letters on human work and the Christianization of culture. Human work and the Christianization of culture come from the grace of the Trinity and are oriented toward its glorification. What is perhaps unique among this Trinitarian triptych is that, unlike the traditional theological manuals that John Paul II might have studied, for example, as the young priest Karol Wojtyła studying at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome, those might have begun with a focus on the oneness or the unity of God, De Deo Uno. But here John Paul II begins with the study of the 3 divine persons of the Trinity, the communio personarum of the Trinity. What is also striking is that he does not begin with the Father, but with the Son. A more traditional approach might have seen him begin first with the Father, and then move to the Son, who is the mission of the Father in the world. But it makes sense that John Paul II begins by looking at Jesus Christ, who was the second person of the Divine and Holy Trinity, who took on our human nature and came to dwell among us as man, being like us, St. Paul tells us in the New Testament, in all things but sin. But I suspect there is another reason, a philosophical reason, and historical reason, that John Paul II begins with Jesus Christ. John Paul knew well, having experienced 2 forms of totalitarianism in his life as a citizen of Poland, Nazism and Soviet communism, that somewhere in the history of the 20th century, the notion, the reality of the human person had gone off the trail, had gone off the rack. He knew from his own experience the devastation of 2 world wars, the calamity of at least 3 forms of totalitarianism, Nazism, socialism, and looking around the world to Russia, communism as well, which reached further than Poland, but also incorporated Poland in its wake. He knew from the fact that the Soviets, the communists, had tried to build an entire city without God, that the concept of the human person had come unmoored, accomplishing oceans of bloodshed and mountains of corpses. It was vitally necessary for the world to bring back the truth and dignity of the human person. And John Paul II understood full well that that could only be accomplished by studying Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of man. And so when he arrived to the papacy after the October 1978 conclave that would elect him pope, he turned first of all to write his inaugural encyclical letter on Jesus Christ, the Redeemer of man. At the outset of that encyclical, in the first chapter, the first line of that first chapter, as we saw last time, he announces that Jesus Christ is the center of the universe and of history. This was a proclamation he had learned not only from his Christian formation, but also from his experience as a bishop participating in the Second Vatican Council, where the fathers of the council taught in the 22nd paragraph of the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the modern world, entitled in Latin Gaudium et Spes, that Jesus Christ reveals man to man himself, and makes his most high calling clear. The opening anthem of Redemptor Hominis is another way of saying the same, and of giving a cosmic dimension, we might even say a liturgical dimension as well, to that proclamation of Gaudium et Spes. As we turn now to look deeper into the encyclical Redemptor Hominis, I want to take a brief look at the structure and format of the encyclical. It contained 4 chapters. We saw the first chapter in our previous session. It dealt with, entitled, Inheritance. John Paul II wanted to put his papacy on the map of history, and to show how he stood in relationship to the Second Vatican Council, as well as his predecessors, John the 23rd and Paul VI. He understood from them the importance of the Council, the enduring legacy of the Council, and he would continue to draw upon it in his own papacy. But in the subsequent chapters of the encyclical, he wants to turn now to the meat, the core of the subject he is to undertake, which is the mystery of the redemption. And so it is in the second chapter that he treats of the mystery of the redemption, which presupposes, as we will see when we turn to examine it more closely, the mystery of the incarnation. In the second chapter, we can say that we see John Paul II, the theologian and professor, on the stage of history, delivering a profound lecture on the meaning of redemption. In the third chapter, then, we turn to look at redeemed man and his situation in the modern world. John Paul II wants to say that the mystery of the redemption continues to be of relevance to humanity today. And more than this, he also wants to make the claim that all that is good in the world of society, human rights, the progress of government and economy, can only be appreciated, deepened, and furthered by orienting the human heart, intellect, and will in the direction of Jesus Christ. This was a point he had made in the homily at the inauguration of his papacy. The great line, "Be not afraid, open wide the doors to Christ," is here in the third chapter being again reproposed. In the fourth chapter, then, we look at the theme of the Church's mission and man's destiny. The Church exists, as John Paul II will say in the second chapter and reiterate throughout the encyclical, in order to call man to the gift of redemption. The Church is a sacramental sign of intimate union with God. John Paul II will make this clear. What we can see then, standing back to take in the wide sweep of the document of the encyclical, is that John Paul II is giving us a profound gift at the theological level. He is proposing, forgive me if I use the burdensome language of theologians, he is giving us a Christological theological anthropology that is also uniquely ecclesiological and oriented toward the mission of the Church in the world. What does that mean? It means that John Paul II is intent at the beginning of his papacy to proclaim the full truth of the human person, which can only be realized from the side of Christ on the cross. The human person can only understand himself in the light of and in relationship to Jesus Christ. But this human person is not called to be an isolated, atomized individual, but rather to reach his full potentiality in the family communion that is the Church, on mission in the world. This is the great heart and core of the encyclical. So without further ado, let's turn now to the second chapter of the encyclical on the mystery of the redemption.